Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People's Story. It all started 3 years ago when I bought my first home. I've been saving for years, working extra shifts at my engineering job, and finally found the perfect place. A modest 2-bedroom house with a generous backyard on the boundary between two neighborhoods. The East Side neighborhood had an uptight homeowners association with manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses. The West Side was more relaxed and diverse, with no HOA to speak of. I deliberately chose a house on the West Side. The real estate agent made it abundantly clear that my property sat just outside the HOA jurisdiction, which was exactly what I wanted. I'd heard enough horror stories about dictatorial HOA to know I wanted nothing to do with them. "You're sure this isn't part of the HOA, right?" I remember asking the agent at least 3 times. "Absolutely positive," she assured me, showing me the property records and boundary maps. "This house belongs to the original development from the 1950s. The newer HOA development was built in the 1990s to the east. Your property line is the dividing line." That was all I needed to hear. I signed the papers and became a proud homeowner. My property had a bit of a quirk that would later prove to be the source of much confusion. My driveway connected to the main road through a small easement that ran alongside the HOA territory. To casual observers, it might appear that my house was part of their neighborhood, but legally, it absolutely wasn't. I'd always been fascinated by beekeeping, and now that I had my own place, I could finally pursue this passion. I took courses, joined local beekeeping associations, and set up 3 hives in my backyard, safely positioned away from neighboring properties. I followed all city regulations regarding urban beekeeping: proper distance from property lines, appropriate hive management, everything by the book. The bees thrived, and I was in heaven. There's something deeply satisfying about maintaining a colony, watching them work, and eventually harvesting honey that you helped create. My first season yielded more honey than I expected, which I shared with neighbors on my side of the boundary. Most were delighted with the gift and curious about the beekeeping process. But trouble was brewing from the east. About 3 months after settling in, I found a printed notice taped to my door. Violation notice. Unauthorized agricultural activity. Livestock insect husbandry prohibited per Section 8.3 of Community Guidelines. Remove within 7 days or face initial fine of $150. I was confused at first, then realized it must be from the neighboring HOA. I checked the notice. Sure enough, it had their logo and was signed by someone identifying themselves as board president. I decided to handle this politely, gathering my property documents and walking over to the address listed for the HOA office, which turned out to be the president's home. The woman who answered the door had perfectly highlighted hair and wore an expression like she'd just smelled something unpleasant. Her eyes narrowed when I explained why I was there. "I received this notice," I said, holding up the paper, "but there must be some mistake. My property isn't part of your HOA." She crossed her arms. "There's no mistake. All properties in this area are under our jurisdiction." "Actually, I have documentation showing that's not the case," I said, trying to remain pleasant as I offered her the property records and plat map. "See? My house falls outside your development's boundaries." She barely glanced at the papers. "Those must be outdated. Our development has expanded over the years." "That would require a legal change to the property records, and there hasn't been one," I explained. "I specifically purchased this home because it isn't part of an HOA. Her expression soured further. "Well, regardless of paperwork technicalities, your beehives are visible from our community and affecting our property values. They need to go." "I'm sorry, but I'm following all city regulations for urban beekeeping. Since I'm not in your HOA, your rules don't apply to my property." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Listen, everyone follows the rules here. I don't care what some outdated papers say. Those bees are a hazard and an eyesore. Remove them or we'll take action." I left feeling uneasy, but determined to stand my ground. I was doing nothing wrong, and I wasn't going to be bullied out of my hobby. Over the following weeks, things escalated. I'd find new violation notices for increasingly ridiculous things. Unapproved garden structure, my beehives, unauthorized landscaping, the bee-friendly wildflowers I'd planted, and improper waste disposal, my compost bin. I ignored them all. Then came the photographs. I'd spot people from the HOA side standing near my property line taking pictures of my yard. Once, a man in a polo shirt emblazoned with Neighborhood Watch actually stepped onto my property to photograph my beehives up close. When I confronted him, he said he was documenting violations and scurried away. The HOA president, let's call her what she was, a complete Karen, even started stopping my west side neighbors to warn them about the dangerous insect situation at my house. One neighbor laughed when telling me about it. She said your bees were aggressive and attacking children, my neighbor snorted. I told her we've never had any issues and that my kids love watching your bees from a safe distance. She didn't like that at all. After 2 months of this harassment, I decided to install security cameras around my property. Not just for the HOA situation, but because it seemed like a sensible precaution for any homeowner. I set up 4 cameras: front door, back door, driveway, and one overlooking the beehives. It turned out to be one of the smartest decisions I'd ever made. About a week later, I needed to attend a weekend beekeeping workshop in a neighboring city. I left Friday morning and planned to return Sunday evening. Before leaving, I checked on my bees, made sure all my cameras were working, and headed off, looking forward to learning new techniques. When I pulled into my driveway Sunday evening, something felt immediately wrong. My front door was slightly ajar, with visible damage around the lock. My heart racing, I called the police from my car, then cautiously approached once I confirmed no one was still inside. The destruction inside left me speechless. My living room had been turned upside down, but not in the way typical burglars would do. This wasn't a search for valuables. This was targeted vandalism. My beekeeping equipment, the specialized tools, the honey extractor I'd saved months to buy, even my protective clothing had been smashed, cut up, or otherwise destroyed. Books on beekeeping had been torn apart. Jars of last season's honey had been smashed on the floor, creating a sticky mess everywhere. Someone had taken a hammer to my spare hive components that I'd been building in my spare time. But the worst was waiting in the backyard. 2 of my 3 active beehives had been knocked over, the frames pulled out and scattered. Thousands of bees were dead or dying, disoriented and defenseless. The surviving colony was in disarray. Years of careful work destroyed in minutes. I felt sick, then furious. Who would do this? Though deep down, I already knew. When the police arrived, I showed them the damage, filed a report, and then remembered my security cameras. We reviewed the footage together, and there it was, undeniable evidence. The recordings showed 3 people approaching my house around noon on Saturday. I recognized all 3 from the HOA neighborhood. Leading the group was Karen herself, along with 2 men who I'd seen at my property line taking photos previously. They tried the front door, found it locked, and then Karen produced what looked like a bump key, a lockpicking tool. After several attempts, they managed to force their way in. The indoor camera captured their systematic destruction. Karen directed the operation, pointing at items to be destroyed while saying, "This will teach them to follow our rules." They spent nearly an hour wrecking my beekeeping equipment before moving to the backyard. The outdoor camera caught the most damning footage. Karen, wearing thick gardening gloves, deliberately knocking over my beehives while one of her companions filmed with his phone, laughing. The other man smashed frames against trees, killing thousands of bees in the process. Before leaving, Karen looked directly at one of my cameras, apparently only noticing it at that point, and froze. The 3 hurriedly departed after that. The police officers were shocked by the footage. "This is clear evidence of breaking and entering, vandalism, and criminal mischief," one officer said. "We'll need copies of this footage, and we'll be following up with these individuals." I spent the rest of the night cleaning up what I could and securing what remained of my 1 surviving beehive. The damage was extensive. I estimated at least $4,000 in destroyed equipment and structural damage to my home, not counting the 2 destroyed colonies themselves and the emotional toll. The next morning, I received an email that made my blood boil. It was from the HOA board, with Karen's name in the signature line. This notice serves as formal billing for enforcement actions taken on your property to remove hazardous and unapproved installations. The total due for contractor removal services is $350, payable within 15 days. Failure to remit payment may result in liens against your property. Additionally, unauthorized surveillance equipment directed at community property must be removed immediately. I couldn't believe the audacity. They break into my home, destroy my property, kill my bees, and then bill me for it, and threaten me for having security cameras on my own property. I forwarded the email to the police detective assigned to my case, who called me within minutes. "Keep all communication from them," he advised. "Don't respond directly. We're pursuing criminal charges, but you should also consult with an attorney about civil action." I didn't need to be told twice. That afternoon, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and HOA issues. After reviewing my documentation, security footage, and the threatening communications, he was confident we had an airtight case. "They've committed multiple crimes and civil offenses," he explained. "Breaking and entering, vandalism, destruction of property, harassment, and potentially even extortion with this demand for payment. The fact that they did this to property that isn't even under their jurisdiction makes it even worse for them." We devised a multi-pronged strategy. pursue criminal charges against the individuals involved, file a civil lawsuit against both the perpetrators and the HOA board for damages, and formally request restraining orders to prevent further harassment. Meanwhile, the situation in the neighborhood was heating up. Karen had apparently told HOA members that I was the one causing problems, claiming I had assaulted her when she kindly asked me to address safety violations. She painted herself as the victim trying to protect community standards. But her story quickly unraveled when several neighbors, including some from the HOA side, expressed skepticism about her version of events. One of them, an elderly gentleman who lived near the boundary, came forward to say he'd witnessed the three entering my property while I was away and thought it looked suspicious. During our preparation for the civil case, my lawyer discovered something crucial. The HOA insurance policy only covered actions taken within their legal jurisdiction. Any actions taken outside those boundaries, like, say, breaking into a non-member's home, weren't covered. This meant the board members could be personally liable for damages. We also discovered through public records research that Karen's own property violated several HOA regulations. Her fence was 2 inches taller than allowed, she had unapproved landscaping changes, and she was running a small business from her home against HOA rules. The hypocrisy was staggering. My lawyer sent a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA board outlining all the evidence we had and demanding they immediately stop all harassment and false claims against me, issue a formal retraction of all violation notices, acknowledge in writing that my property is not under their jurisdiction, prepare for legal proceedings regarding the break-in and vandalism, their response. Silence for 3 days, then a meek request to discuss an amicable resolution. Meanwhile, the police had been building their case. 2 weeks after the incident, I received a call from the detective. We're executing arrest warrants today for all 3 individuals involved in the break-in. The district attorney is charging them with felony breaking and entering, criminal mischief, and destruction of property. I wish I could have seen Karen's face when officers showed up at her door with handcuffs. According to the detective, she kept insisting she had authority to enforce community standards even as they read her rights. The arrests made local news, and suddenly the HOA board couldn't distance themselves fast enough from the unauthorized actions of a few overzealous members. They claimed no knowledge of the plan to enter my property, despite the email billing me for enforcement actions. With criminal charges proceeding and the board in panic mode, my civil case gained tremendous leverage. My lawyer arranged a mediation session where the HOA attorney looked physically ill as we presented our evidence, including the footage of Karen directing the destruction while others followed her orders. My client is willing to consider settlement, my lawyer stated calmly, but it must include full compensation for all damages, explicit acknowledgement that his property is not subject to your HOA governance, a formal apology, and a binding agreement preventing any further contact or harassment. The HOA lawyer glanced at the board members present. And if we don't agree? My lawyer smiled thinly. Then we proceed to court, where we'll seek punitive damages in addition to compensatory ones. We'll also name each board member personally in the lawsuit, given that your insurance doesn't cover actions outside your jurisdiction. We have evidence that the board was aware of and endorsed these actions, despite your claims to the contrary. They settled. The final agreement included full compensation for all damages, $4,500, additional compensation for emotional distress, $2,500, a written apology to be distributed to all HOA members, installation of clear boundary markers between HOA property and non-HOA properties, removal of Karen from the board, which had already happened following her arrest. A binding agreement never to contact me or enter my property payment for professional restoration of my surviving beehive and replacement of the destroyed colonies. The criminal case proceeded separately. Karen and her accomplices eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges to avoid trial. Their sentences included probation, community service, and restitution payments. In a twist that felt like poetic justice, the judge assigned Karen's community service hours to a local environmental center where she had to help maintain their educational beehives. In the aftermath, the HOA underwent a complete restructuring. Many members, horrified by what had been done in their name, demanded more transparency and accountability. They implemented new policies requiring legal verification before any enforcement actions could be taken, and created clearer boundaries between their properties and the surrounding non-HOA homes. As for me, I used the settlement money to not only repair my home and replace my beekeeping equipment, but to upgrade my setup. I built a beautiful educational beehive display with informational signs about the importance of pollinators visible from the public walkway. I also installed prominent but tasteful signs at my property line reading "Private property not subject to HOA regulations," with smaller text citing the relevant property codes. Several neighbors from both sides of the boundary have since become friends. Many from the HOA side admitted they'd always found the strict rules suffocating, but were afraid to speak up. Some have even expressed interest in beekeeping, and I've enjoyed showing them the basics. The most surprising outcome? My property value actually increased. Apparently being the non-HOA house with the interesting history and the cool bees made my place distinctive in the local real estate market. A realtor friend told me she's had several clients specifically ask about that bee house that stood up to the HOA. I still keep the security cameras running, of course, but these days, they mostly capture beautiful footage of my thriving bee colonies going about their business, pollinating the neighborhood and producing honey that I still share with neighbors, even those on the east side. The best revenge, as they say, is living well, and having the law completely on your side doesn't hurt either. The next one is a malicious compliances story. About 2 years ago, I had a customer complain that we had raised the price of his phone contract. I work for one of the main UK mobile phone companies here as a customer service rep. I've had my fair share of terrible customers and ridiculous requests, but this was the straw that broke my back. So every year we have a PROCI increase in March. It's the rate of inflation as published in November, plus 3.9%. This is in all contracts. Has been for as long as I've worked there. Every year we send a letter out in Feb to let people know, and every year we get calls asking, "WTF is this?" Most of the time I deal with these fairly well. I explain they agreed to it in their contract and occasionally read the exact part of said contract. What makes it more delicious is if they've bought it in store, they have a physical copy. So I ask, "Do you see where you signed your name in the box that says, 'I have read and understand the terms and conditions of the contract'?" Well, just above there, the box above that says, "I understand that as of March, the price will increase by the rate of CPI plus 3.9%. And that normally ends those arguments. Well, one day I'd spent all day dealing with these calls, and I get a guy call, let's call him Kevin. He complains about the price increase, saying how he never agreed to it in his contract, that his contract says it's, let's say, £30, and that's what he agreed to. No more, no less. He would never agree to something where the price was going to change. After us, the normal back and forth of explaining it, how all companies do it, not just us, petrol, food shops, books, everything. But he was having none of it. Around about the time most people accept and give up, he was still going strong, going in loops, repeating the same arguments I've shot down already. At one point, T says he never read it, so it shouldn't apply. I asked him, "Sir, if you don't read the 30 miles per hour speed limit sign and do 70 miles per hour there, you will still get stopped by the police. Just because you didn't read it doesn't mean it's not correct. Besides, you signed the box saying that you had read it, so I'm afraid you were aware of it." Now, that was perhaps me allowing my emotions to get in the way, but he did not like that at all. He said, if he doesn't get the contract reverted to what he agreed, he would cancel his direct debit and see us in court. Cue malicious compliance. I noticed earlier during the conversation that his contract was actually £60, and that his first 3 months were half price. But the agent who added the discount added an undated 50% discount, instead of the 3 MHP discount that auto removes. Well, given the call was an hour long and I was overdue my break, I finally said, "Okay, sir, on this occasion, I am willing to waive the price increase for you and revert your plan to its original agreed-upon price. Because I can't stop the increase, I will add a discount of his increase here to the line, and as you've stated, your plan to be put back to what you agreed to. So the 50% discount you have has now been removed. The plan is back to £60. He tries to talk. "But don't worry, sir. We won't be making you repay the backdated discount from the last 12 months. That's not how it works here, so I can confirm that your plan will remain at the agreed price of £60. After a stunned silence, he recovers and asks, "What do I mean, £60? I explained that he agreed to a contract at £60 per month with 3M half price, but that the wrong 50% discount had in fact been added and had been left on longer than was intended. He told me to leave it alone, not do anything, but it was too late. He had already confirmed he wanted it, and even if he hadn't, we have a system in place to report excessive or incorrect discounts, which I could have been reporting him on. But this was much, much more enjoyable. In the end, it was escalated to manager, who stuck by my actions to remove the incorrect discount, and in fact removed my discount for the CPI, as its policy not to discount these. It went above her to the executive complaints team, who I followed up with, and noticed he was given a letter of deadlock that he could try taking to Ofcom. It felt great. The guy had an incredibly poor attitude, spoke to me like I was his to do with as he wanted, and wanted to spit his day out in a tantrum. I claimed the victory in the name of those who work in a role with direct customer interactions when they've treat you like nothing and were truly horrible people. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I started dating a girl about 7 years ago. When we met, she was getting up on her feet and trying to find her way in life. I let my imagination take over and started envisioning her potential and what kind of life we would have together. I had never had the feeling of disarmed, punch-drunk love that I had for her, and that probably clouded my judgment. Throughout our time together, she would reach out and ask for money for things, repairing a car, paying a bill, etc. We were getting closer the longer we dated, and I would always help her, assuming that I was making an investment in both of our lives by helping her through a period of instability. In all, I probably gave her about $15,000. After about 4 years of this, I finally popped the question. She accepted, and we were married after a brief engagement. About 6 months into our marriage, she told me she'd been having car trouble and needed about $2,000 for the repair. This struck me as a bit odd. By that time, I was more than familiar with her vehicle and knew her explanation for what the issue was didn't make sense. One evening after she went to sleep, I went and had a look at the part of the car she had said was faulty. No issue. This set off alarms. I grabbed her phone and, on a hunch, typed in the amount she had asked for, and it returned a text message with a guy she had previously dated. Apparently, he had reached out and asked for help repairing his car, and lo and behold, he had asked for the same amount she had requested from me. My stomach turned as the thought entered my mind that maybe I had subsidized other of this guy's expenses across the time I had dated my wife. As I read through the messages further, I realized that this guy was the Lester Diamond to my Sam Rothstein, and I had been played like a fool. Look up that reference if you're not familiar. I had spent my entire relationship as a proxy sugar daddy. I thought on this for a few weeks and tried to figure out what to do next. These sacrifices were not insignificant to me. I had been working as a surgical resident for much of our courtship, making very little money and working long hours to form a strong, solid foundation for our future. This was devastating, and I realized that I couldn't reconcile the situation. Once I had cooled down, I waited for an evening. My wife went to bed early, and I got into her phone. I caught up on the most recent messages she and her paramour had sent one another. Then I initiated a conversation with him. I posed as her and told him she had been drinking, she is a recovering alcoholic, and that she needed to get some things off her chest. I didn't go overboard, but I did send messages to the effect that she was not over him, and that her affections had grown since marrying me. I all but teed him up to move in for a relationship with her. I then abruptly ended the chat and asked that we not talk about the conversation again in order to avoid furthering her relapse, but that we both keep in mind what we had spoken about and see if we could make a life together work. I then deleted the texts from her phone and hoped the two would proceed forward together. They did. I kept an eye on the texts for the next few months and progressively saw things heat up between them until it looked like she was committed to leaving me. We didn't have many assets together at the time, as I was still finishing a surgical residency, so I knew the divorce would be quick and painless and that we would go our separate ways and she would start a new life with the guy whose underachievements I had been funding. So I filed for divorce and had her served papers. I was generous with the $10,000 in assets between us in order to make the split as quick as possible and went on our ways to begin life anew. And you'd think that is the end of the story, right? Oh no, friend. You see, Mama didn't raise a cuck. In our state, not only are assets separated upon marital severance, but so are debts, and medical school is ducking expensive, really expensive, $250,000 expensive, so the idiot ended up with a parting gift of about $125,000 of my student loans. And guess who she shotgun married 2 months after our divorce? Fortunately for her, she'll only have to pay half of that amount, because if history does indeed repeat itself, he'll be paying the other half once their marriage ends as well. It was all I could do to not send them a piggy bank as a wedding gift. Best $15,000 I ever spent. The next one is an entitled people story. For a while now, we've been having a dispute concerning several things wrong with our place, and he either refuses to do anything or says he'll do something and then is too lazy or greedy to follow through. Last January, a new dispute began. Nearly annually, we've had a maintenance guy come over to perform maintenance on the heating unit. This was a major nuisance to us because without prior warning, there would be a guy at our door calling my husband, and either him or me had to drop whatever we were doing and come home so the maintenance can be done. Later, we found out this was because the company the maintenance guy works for would call the landlord to make an appointment, and the landlord would just pick the first possible option instead of coordinating the date with us. But I digress. The real trouble started when we got the bill for the maintenance. In our country, the landlord and tenant have to have agreements on who pays for what. Our landlord didn't talk to us about this, didn't mention anything or whatever. He just gave the maintenance company our info and they sent us the bill. This didn't sit right with me at all, but my husband didn't want any trouble with anyone, so he paid the bill, which wasn't small. Unfortunately, due to difficult personal circumstances, this happened thrice in total. The third time was last January. My husband paid the bill again, but I decided enough is enough. I started messaging the landlord asking to pay us back for all of the bills. I also spoke to a lawyer. All in all, she said it's unlawful that he has no agreements with us and still makes us pay the bill. In the meantime, the landlord came to my husband's workplace during work hours to talk. In other words, he came to rant and yell at my husband. In his unhinged ranting and yelling, which my brilliant husband recorded, the landlord said that if a lawyer says so, then he'll pay us back. Ask and you shall receive, Mr. Landlord. I contacted the lawyer again. She sent him a demand letter and gave him a week to pay us back. Did he pay back? Of course not. After weeks of back and forth over email and me calling him out on lies and inconsistencies and at this point demanding payment, last week he tells me that he has no obligation to pay us back because my husband signed a contract with the aforementioned maintenance company. He also said we can ask them to send us that contract. Husband and I talked about this and came to the conclusion that it's unlikely as neither of us remembers any contract, let alone have a copy. The next day, my husband calls the company to ask for the contract. Long story short, they told him they don't have any contracts with us personally. They only have a contract with the landlord, which obligates them to perform maintenance on heating units in all of his properties. He should have given us a subcontract that he'd have to make himself, which means the company wouldn't have it anyways. I sent the landlord an email telling him they don't have any contracts with us and once again demanding payment. This was Friday last week. This past Monday, the landlord answered my email. It briefly said, "See the maintenance contract attached." Weird. I open the attachment. Oh, I see a contract, all right. First thing I see is the maintenance company logo. Mind you, a few days earlier, that same company told my husband they don't have any contracts with him. Second thing I see is the opening paragraph of the contract being addressed directly to my husband. I scroll down to the last page and I thought, nah, that's not how husband's name writes. There was a written date and a signature. The handwriting was obviously not my husband's, and the signature looked to me to be similar to his, but not his. I thought it looked very awkward. It didn't have the same flow my husband's handwriting has, if that makes sense. At the time, I wasn't 100% sure though. When my husband got home from work, I showed him the contract. He immediately said it's not his signature. He grabbed some other documents he signed before to compare. He wrote down his signature on a blank piece of paper to show me how he signs. Clear as day, the signature was forged. Then we looked closer at the contract. We could see that the opening paragraph that addressed my husband personally was in a slightly different font than the rest. Then it also occurred to us that this contract only applies for only one particular year, 2023. Okay, so if this contract is only valid in 2023, and when signed by the customer, the company is obligated to perform maintenance within that same year, then why did no one perform any maintenance on our heating unit in 2023? Spoiler, because this contract is fake. That's why. We were dumbstruck, furious, and frankly tired of this bullcrap. We started Googling what to do in this situation. Most consistent answer we found was to file an official police report. The police will investigate and take necessary measures. So we called the police. We have an appointment tomorrow. I'm going to bed now. This turned out way longer than I expected, but it feels good to get it out. If you read this far, thank you. If anyone's interested in an update, let me know. Shane Lizard out. Tiny update. We spoke to the police, filed a report, and we have to wait for now. I hope to hear from the police next week. My husband told me the landlord came by at his job during work hours. Again, he wanted to make an appointment with us to talk about the issues going on at our place. Unrelated to this story, I'll post the other crazy stories on the weekend. What is related to this story is that he tried really hard to convince, or should I say gaslight, my husband that the contract is legit and that he did sign it back in 2023. A little piece of context I haven't mentioned before is that we've been living here since 2021. If there was a contract, it would make way more sense if my husband signed it then, not 2 years later. Also, hi Oz, saw your video. You said you'll be keeping a close eye on me. To that I say great, now we can watch each other. The next one is an entitled parent story. I, 19F. Am a server at a restaurant with a bar in it. The bar side of the restaurant is, of course, 21 plus, and anyone who orders an alcoholic beverage is required to show the waiter their ID. The rest of the restaurant, however, is child-friendly. We were serving breakfast, and I was serving a table of two, a young girl who looked about 8 or 9, and her entitled mother, EM. However, this mom is more than entitled, as she will be arrested by the end of this story. I go and take their drink orders after the hostess sits them down. The young girl gets an orange juice while the mother gets a water and mimosa. I, of course, check the mom's ID and see that she's born in the early 80s, so she's good for a mimosa. I let the bartender know that I need a mimosa to serve, and I work on the orange juice for the child and the mother's water. Once I have all 3 drinks, I serve their table and take their meal orders. Everything seems to be going smoothly until I bring back their meals. As I bring back the plates, the mother screams at me. EM, you served my child alcohol! I know for a fact that cannot be true because I'm the one who made the juice and never even went behind the bar where the drinks are. Me, ma'am, you must be mistaken. I didn't put any alcohol in the juice and I had my eyes on it until it reached your table. EM, well then smell it. She handed me her child's glass and it did smell like alcohol. Emmy, once again I know that I did not put alcohol in your child's drink. Either someone did it while you weren't looking or you did it yourself. But the juice had not alcohol before it came to your table. The mom looked at me angrily and demanded to see my manager. EM, I am going to sue you for giving my child alcohol. Bring me your manager. I get the manager and she gets both mine and the mom's side of the story. Security was even alerted because apparently the child had drunk a few sips of the alcohol. My manager, security, and I went and watched the security footage since both me and the mom swore we didn't put alcohol in the juice. Not only did we discover that I was innocent, we saw the mom, as soon as I have placed the glasses down and left, drink half of the child's juice and filled it back up with her mimosa. And then she instructed her child to drink some of it. The mother was arrested for giving her child alcohol and was given a lifetime ban from the restaurant. If she appears again, she will be immediately arrested again. Not how I planned my work morning, but at least it was amusing to watch an EM get what she deserved. Edit. I was informed by someone who spoke to the kid that they didn't even want orange juice and hates orange juice. Her mom told her to order it just so that she could mix the drinks. The child originally wanted chocolate milk. You best believe I made sure she got her chocolate milk. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.